Well, whoever gets into the White House will owe some of his victory to a huge amount of mass media marketing. Both Barack Obama and Mitt Romney have poured millions of dollars into their respective campaigns. The airwaves have been flooded with advertisements and the internet awash with attempts to get their message across. Well, with me now to discuss brand Obama versus brand Romney is Bambos Neophytou, who is head of strategy for advertising agency Inferno. Welcome to the programme. How would you define their individual brands, Romney versus Obama?
Well, I think the interesting thing is the fact that it's been very difficult for Obama to define his brand. He had a very clear one last time around because he was the challenger and it was all about change. And he's been caught between trying to hark back to that success and being the incumbent. And being the incumbent means you trust me because I've done the job. And it's been slightly easier for Romney to define himself as a challenger, paradoxically, even though he seems to be, certainly to us in Europe, a slightly more establishment figure, independently wealthy and so on. What
methods do politicians use to reinforce or establish brands?
Well, I think they're the same techniques that you see for commercial brands everywhere. Taglines, imagery. I mean, I think it's quite interesting in America how visual the campaigning is, or how visual the culture is. There's a very interesting kind of parable or origin myth from the 60s where the Nixon-Kennedy debate, everyone who heard it on the radio was convinced that Nixon had won, and everyone who saw it on telly was convinced that Kennedy had won. And I think to a certain extent Romney's success has been a symptom of that. He looks the part, he looks like a president, and his ability to be so close in terms of how some of the polls are appearing and in terms of people's perceptions is part of his success. He looks the part despite a number of gaffes or errors or some of the weaknesses that the Obama camp have tried to expose.
Outside America, you might think that Barack Obama is somebody who might be perceived within America as being outside the system, maybe a little bit of a maverick, certainly very progressive in his thinking, and Mitt Romney perhaps more staid and more establishment.
That might be how you perceive it, and we perceive it outside of the system. But actually, it's been quite interesting to see that Mitt Romney's campaign has been more effective on Facebook than Obama's. You've had, although Obama has about 30 million fans on Facebook and Mitt Romney only about 12, actually the number of engaged posts, the number of people responding, has been far higher as a proportion of fans on the Mitt Romney side. So they've certainly caught up the Republicans in terms of using social media, and also being so close in terms of what they stand for has been part of the problem for Obama to define himself differently from Mitt Romney. And
what about this negative campaigning that goes on? So really hard-hitting images that you see in some of these advertisements. One of them actually from the Obama campaign, no, sorry, I beg your pardon, from the Romney campaign, suggesting that Chrysler was closing a plant and shipping to China. But then it was a woman who was lying on the floor and it said roadkill. You know, it's a very hard image, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's very hard to disentangle that kind of communication from the other stuff that goes on, because so much of it happens. There's a lot of money spent on advertising. I think one thing is true, though, that as in commercial communications for brands, it's actually very hard for people to feel supportive of and identify with negative campaigning. As for most brands try to behave like human beings. They try to have personalities or stand for something that you can identify with or you want to belong to. So it's very interesting that when human beings behave like brands, as in political campaigning, they use negative campaigning, which there's lots of evidence to suggest isn't very effective, because it kind of associates them with negative campaigning, smear tactics, and the kind of things that don't really appeal in a positive way. So it's not quite clear what the effect of those things is.
Thank you very much indeed.